Hey guys, today I want to talk a little bit about level scaling and why I don't think it has been particularly successful for Diablo 4. Now, a lot of people have expressed problems with level scaling and a lot of, I guess, discontent about it. There's also I've seen a lot of videos being made as well. And in general, I just don't think it has been very good. I think that it creates a lot more issues. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that level scaling is very effective at letting people group easily and whenever they want with their friends. And that is true. And as a result, I don't think that Blizzard will ever particularly change level scaling because so much of the game is based around that. So I'm not saying we should get rid of level scaling altogether because I do see the benefits, but I mainly want to explain why it's an issue and from there what we can do to remedy. I'm also at the end of the video going to talk a little bit about why I don't think that level scaling in groups is completely great either. I still have a lot of problems when I played in a group. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk a little bit about progression in games. I know one of my last videos is about progression, but this is going to be from a different approach. In most games, when we talk about progressing, we're usually thinking about some kind of staircase where there are very defined tiers of difficulty and steps in your game that require progression from one to another. This creates a really good feeling of stepping into a new zone and experiencing new content. So before Diablo 4, I played a lot of classic WoW, and there was a very real, very tangible experience of stepping into Duskwood at level 20 or going to Stranglethorn at level 30. And the really cool part about this was that you could go a little bit earlier if you felt strong, or you could go a little bit later. Now, because of this, because that there was a fixed difficulty that required you to progress from zone to zone to zone, you sometimes would also get this feeling of being somewhere where you're not exactly supposed to be. For example, doing like an elite quest, right? That was way harder, but if you were very good, you're very strong, you could go ahead and engage with that. Even in games that aren't entirely reliant on, the difference in level between mobs, still have this experience of going somewhere where you're not supposed to be. So, for example, in Elden Ring, getting teleported to Caelid, it was certainly felt a lot harder, and it was like, damn, this is way more difficult than anything I've done. Or even in Dark Souls One, you could go to the catacombs at like the start of the game, and it was very clear that this is way harder than anything you've done. But if you want to, you can challenge yourself and you can experience that content. And I really love that feeling. For regardless, whatever system exists, the important thing is that for these kind of staircases, often the content is a reward in itself, and simply being able to experience the harder content was a direct result of your progression from earlier content. And I really like that system. However, not all games are like this. Many games, especially in ARPGs, are more of a hamster wheel. And this is that sort of like famous line of, you're doing the same content over and over to get gear so you can do the same content faster, so you can do more damage to get even more loot to do even more content faster. And eventually you're just running on a hamster wheel, right? The content is exactly the same. It might get harder in terms of stats, but fundamentally, you're doing the same exact thing over and over and over again. And you're basically just playing that till you get bored. That's not to say that these games aren't fun. I've spent way too much time playing Cookie Clicker, and even Diablo 3 with the Greater Rift system functioned a lot like this, where the difference between a Greater Rift 50 and a Greater Rift 100, ultimately it's just more damage. They're not fundamentally changing. You're just getting better and doing more damage until you've kind of run yourself out of steam. Now, the line can be a little bit blurry between like a staircase versus a hamster wheel, but to me, the important distinction is that when you have certain steps, there is some kind of transformative content that's altering how you're playing or what content you're actually engaging in. And often these steps are not quite as, I guess, like linear as the hamster wheel, which just feels like it keeps up with you. So, unfortunately, in Diablo 4, we don't have either of these systems. Because of level scaling, we're actually on a treadmill. What this means is that you are constantly falling behind the world that you're playing in simply by playing the game. You are required to keep up with power progression, either in the gear or the Paragon board, to keep up with the pace as the world around you levels up as you gain experience. You can't turn off your experience game while playing Diablo 4. So if you're not keeping up with your power, you're going to be falling behind. The treadmill is going to keep going even if you're not getting power benefits. The really awkward thing is that this is going to lead to these very unsavory peaks and valleys in your player power relative to your current level. Sometimes you're just absolutely dominating the content. You're like one-shotting everything, and the game feels super easy. And then if you're not getting a strong piece of gear, or if you're not getting some very strong Paragon board upgrades, you're actually getting relatively weaker over time, even though you're basically doing the exact same content. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to go, 10 levels and feel like I've actually gotten weaker over time. I don't like games where you are actually punished by leveling. Additionally, this also has made it very difficult, in my opinion, to swap builds and try something new, because you're just going to feel so much noticeably weaker, and you don't really have any kind of small steps to go down with and explore a new build or explore some changes to like your gear or your build. So in Diablo 3, you could go from like Torment 16 or whatever, you could go to Torment 10 if your build was not that good, but you can't really do that in Diablo 4 because the only thing that you would go down in power level to is to like world tier 3. And then you're not actually stepping from world tier 3 to world tier 4. You're stepping in from world tier 3 to whatever scale your world tier 4 has been scaled to you. I don't really like that. I don't think it has been very good. And it felt like for me when I wanted to swap builds, I basically needed to go ahead and farm every single piece for the new build and then just like hard swap over and never look back. I just like ditch the old build because it's hard to swap back after that. So for me, the best moments of Diablo 4 have actually been when I get to escape this level scaling and, fight predetermined difficulty content. And I have a couple examples. First and foremost, the thing that I think most people were very excited about were the Capstone Dungeons. These are hard set to level 50 and I think level 73. They're very fixed levels of difficulty that once you complete them, you are unlocking new content. And in fact, I think it did this really well. The Capstone Dungeon at level 50 was probably my favorite moment with the game so far, especially when I did it a little underleveled, and especially when I did it underleveled on my hardcore character, where there was a lot more at risk if I died. This was really excellent for me. I had to change my build on softcore on my first playthrough just to be able to kill it, and I absolutely loved that challenge. And when I did complete that challenge, I had a huge amount of the game opened up to me. Similarly, I had that experience when I did the level 73 Capstone Dungeon to unlock World Tier 4. And not only that, but because I did it fairly early at around level 60 or so, there was this really amazing period of the game where everything around me was like 10 levels higher than me because World Tier 4 starts at level 73 and I was like 10 levels back. I'm still like 60. And I did most of my renowned grind that way when the game felt genuinely very difficult. And I had to really, work my way through the game and be careful about how I was playing. And on top of that, I was getting these incredibly, I was getting the ancestral pieces, which were really upgrading my gear. And at that point, the game felt great because it was a static difficulty that I was working my way up into. Finally, of course, there are the nightmare dungeons, which do have a static difficulty that escapes the level scaling. And these are very good. Unfortunately, right now, they're kind of a waste of time because of how experience is. But luckily, they are going to be getting fixed, very, very soon before season one. And now you might be thinking, well, if they fix nightmare dungeons, that's great, right? We've just solved all of the problems. And I would say, no, it doesn't actually fix anything about level scaling. You're just spending less time with level scaled zones. So it's not that level scaling has been fixed. Level scaling still absolutely sucks. You just don't have to engage with it anymore. And past that, also, there is one more thing about Nightmare Dungeons that will still make it a little bit unfortunate, and you're still going to be kind of stuck on that treadmill. And that's the fact that there's still going to be XP penalties based on your level. What this unfortunately does is it makes a very large incentive to stay within your level bracket. So within, 3 levels higher than you or so. And you're still going to be forced to keep up with Nightmare Dungeons as you progress through them. And I'll explain this, but basically, let's say that you're a level 80 and you're doing a tier 26 dungeon. At tier 26, you have level 80 mobs. So we got level 80 doing level 80 mobs, right? You do that dungeon and you get 500k experience. Great. Now, when you turn level 81, although the difficulty stays the same, because you're going to be getting an XP penalty, you're actually going to be getting less than 500k experience per hour. So if you not per hour, but you're getting less than 500k for that run. So if you wanted to keep getting the same experience rates, you're going to have to progress. Now, this is definitely better than how it exists now, but I still don't know if this is very good. There's still this feeling of I am falling behind with the world just because I'm playing the game. And if I don't actively get gear, if I'm not getting, my big legendary nodes, or if I'm not getting, a glyph unlocked in my Paragon board, it feels like you're falling behind, and then you kind of jump up when you get an upgrade, and then you're falling behind again, and then you jump up. It's not good. It's not this nice linear progression that I'm typically seeing in ARPGs. Level scaling is good for group leveling. However, there are still a couple issues that I noticed. I played the vast majority of like 1 through 70 with with my friend, and I noticed these issues right away. It was really obvious to me. Okay. First is that Diablo 4 is a pretty fast game. Sure, it's a lot slower than like Path of Exile or Diablo 3, but in general, it's an ARPG. You're killing mobs quite fast. This means that being relatively stronger for your level actually gives you a massive advantage versus being like relatively weaker. And it kind of felt like a lot of times me and my friend were taking turns like carrying each other based on who happened to be at different relative levels of power. Even though we were the same level, just because they had more gear or maybe we were a couple levels off, sometimes it would feel like they would just clear the entire dungeon, kill everything in one hit, while I was basically like just running behind them like a necromancer minion and just picking up loot. It's not a very satisfying feeling, and it's different than something where you're going to have like slower fights. So maybe if fights took like a minute, so for example in single target bosses, especially in the early game, I still felt like it felt great, because even though they might contribute 60% of the damage and you're contributing 40% of the damage, it still feels like you're doing your part, as opposed to just getting hard carried like in most dungeons. This also creates this very weird mechanic of reverse power leveling, where like a level 70 or even like a level 60 can get some of the best gear in the game. And relative to level 70, they are so incredibly dominant compared to like a level 90 with level 90 gear in a level 90 dungeon. So you're actually getting reversed power leveled by lower level mobs. I'm not even joking. I think that if this was like more popular, or maybe even in seasons, we'll see this, where like you're gonna have like a level 95 getting carried by three level 70s in their group that are just one-shotting everything, and they're actually getting power leveled to level 100 faster than they could. It just, that doesn't make sense. I don't think that's a good mechanic. It shouldn't be in the game. And unfortunately, the only place I've ever seen this backwards mechanic is in retail World of Warcraft, where you have, like level 10 discipline priests that are like, because they're scaled so poorly for level 10 and there's level scaling. You have discipline priests that basically one shot the entire dungeon, and then they can carry like entire groups of level 50. And I don't like it. I don't think anybody feels good playing that. It just feels like the game is you're kind of like just playing the mechanics of the game at that point. In addition, one of the really annoying parts about playing with a group is you can't even trade. So, well, first off, you can't even trade uniques or legendaries at all, which feels really bad. But even the fact that gear is rolled to your current level, not in terms of stats, but the requirement to equip it. So, let's say you're level 80 and you drop a yellow, it's going to require you level 80 to equip it. This means that if you're playing with your friend who's level 60 and you get a good yellow, it's kind of useless to trade it to them, because they're not going to be able to equip it for 20 levels, and they probably found an upgrade in 20 levels. So you're not even getting a good sense, and I really think that they should probably try to fix that right away. Now, I do have a couple solutions for these problems. Again, I'm not a great game designer. Blizzard probably has thought about these a lot more than I have. I just wanted to give my opinions as to what we could do to move in a better direction. Personally, I still feel like they should keep level scaling from 1 to 50 so people can do the campaign together, as well as, do the early dungeons. Maybe when they're leveling, they can do their like renown grind, and that's not as bad. In fact, when you do the when post campaign, there are actual like levels. So I think you can do fractured peaks at like level 1, but then like dry steps is level 20, and like Kegistan is level 30. So you do actually have a bit of progression if you're not leveling through the campaign. But I think that past World Tier 3, I would really like to see them move to more defined difficulties. And if that's too difficult to have every single zone as one specific level, which I agree that would be a little chaotic, you can have it scale within the brackets. So let's say that Fractured Peaks, for example, was like 50 to 55, and then like Dry steppes was 55 to 60, etc. If they wanted to, they could also just make the entire open world have, they could just let the open world go, level scaled there. So if you want to do Hell Tides with your friends, that's great. But then the dungeons themselves have fixed difficulties. That way, you could still do the dungeons if you needed aspects. But once you get to like World Tier 3 or World Tier 4, you actually have some kind of fixed difficulty and you can progress to harder and harder dungeons that you're farming. And I think this is actually really great because it's going to escape the current issue where you're essentially farming the best dungeon for experience from level 20 all the way to level 100. That just feels really weird. I would much rather, you know, like giga farm this dungeon until like level 30 and then I'll switch do this one until level 40. At least you're seeing a little bit more of the world. And again, in the higher levels this will be fixed with the nightmare dungeon buff. Additionally, I really think that if they're not already planning this, they have to add this. We need to see a world tier 5 at like level 80 or 85, and I would especially love to see a world tier 5 that's actually difficult for open world contents. And again, I would even love it more if you could progress into level 85 and 90 and 95 zones within that world tier 5. So if you are level 80, you could still try to do the level 95 content. It's not restricted to you, but you're going to also have, a challenge area that you progress into as you gear. Now, as a final hot take, I'll bring up something that I know a lot of people hated, and that's actually the Diablo 3 original Torment difficulty. Now, I know a lot of people really hated it, and they felt like it was awful because you hit Diablo 3 Torment and you couldn't do anything. But I don't think that this was a problem of the mechanic or the progression of the game itself, but rather it was just way, way, way too difficult for anybody to have meaningful or steady progress. Kind of like if the first raid boss of a tier was like harder than everything else in that raid, it would feel awful that you're basically hard stuck fighting the first boss for like the entire season, right? But I did like the fact that when you got to Torment difficulty, it was very difficult. It required good gear, and then you would complete Act 1. There was a difficult boss at the end of Act 1 that you had to do. Then you would progress into Act 2. Act 2 was even harder than Act 1. It was insanely hard. And if you farmed Act 2 for slightly better gear, that would get you even more of a build going. That would allow you to kill the Act 2 boss, Belial. That was actually my favorite part of Diablo 3 was spending a whole weekend just slamming my face at Torment Belial. And then after that, you would progress into Act 3. And by then, it was just too hard for me. I was getting one shot by everything. But I really like that. I thought that was a lot of fun. And I think a lot of people actually enjoyed watching it as well. If you think back to how many people were watching like the world first hardcore Diablo on the world first Diablo hardcore on Torment before the nerf. It was actually like a really fun event, and as always, congrats to Kriparian and Crippy for that. So yeah, I don't know. I want to capture that experience again going into harder difficulty. Right now, outside of basically Echo of Lilith, which is just so substantially harder than anything else in the game, that it doesn't really feel like a progression. It just feels kind of like they slammed an end boss in there just to have. And I really really hope that they add more pinnacle bosses that unlock new content that challenge people to do that content and get better over time. Thanks again for watching, guys. As always, I appreciate you guys hearing the feedback that I have for the game, and I hope you learned something new with it. I got a couple of videos coming up right now as far as the channel goes. I'm trying to, keep it a little bit balanced between these style of video essays where I'm talking about problems with the game and possible solutions, while also, putting out, build guides. I've been playing my Barbarian a lot. I'm going to be working on my Druid very soon, and then just like generic guides such as the gambling guide where I go over a couple things on how to like effectively farm legendary aspects which apply to basically everybody. So again, thanks you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.